The morning sun cast its golden rays through the trees of Rosewood Park, painting long, soft shadows across the manicured lawns and meandering paths. Birds chirped high in the branches, their melodies harmonizing with the faint rustle of leaves stirred by the early breeze. At the far end of the park, on a weathered wooden bench shaded by an ancient oak tree, sat a woman wrapped in layers of quiet dignity. Her name was Evelyn Carter, a 74-year-old black woman with salt and pepper hair tucked neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her eyes were warm but tired, the kind that had witnessed both beauty and brutality over a lifetime spent in the same city that was now struggling to remember its conscience. She wore a cream cardigan over a pale blue dress, and on her lap rested a cloth tote filled with breadcrumbs, books, and an old thermos of tea. Each morning, like clockwork, she made her way to Rosewood Park. It was more than routine, it was ritual. She'd sit in the same spot, sprinkle breadcrumbs for the pigeons and sparrows that gathered faithfully, and read from a worn copy of Maya Angelou's And Still I Rise. This was her sacred time, free from the noise of the world, untouched by the urgency of change. But on this particular morning, serenity was a fragile illusion. From the distance, the crunch of heavy boots against gravel disturbed the park's gentle rhythm. Officer Jason Rourke, a 38-year-old white cop with mirrored sunglasses and a reputation for asserting authority where none was needed, was on his usual patrol. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of swagger that came not from confidence but from unchecked power. The badge on his chest gleamed under the sun, as did the tension in his jaw as he scanned the park like a predator looking for movement. Jason's eyes landed on Evelyn, alone, sitting, feeding birds. He narrowed his gaze. Something about her stillness seemed to offend him. He approached slowly, deliberately, boots thudding with intent. Evelyn looked up, her hand pausing midair with a piece of bread. Their eyes met, hers calm, his suspicious. "You live around here?" he asked. Voice clipped. "Suspicious." Evelyn blinked, not startled, just confused by the question. "Yes," she said slowly, "just a few blocks over. I've come to this park every morning for years." Jason looked her over, eyes traveling from her hat to her shoes. "Got any ID?" "Excuse me?" she said, brows raised. "I'm just feeding the birds." "You match a description," he snapped. "We had a report about suspicious individuals loitering in the park this morning. I'm 74 years old. Sir, I hardly think I match the description of." He cut her off. "I asked for ID. Show me or I'll have to detain you." Evelyn sighed, searching slowly through her tote bag. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from age. The tension in the air tightened like a wire. And then, just as she pulled out her wallet, he snatched it from her hands with unnecessary force. She gasped, more from insult than pain. "That wasn't necessary," she said, voice controlled. Jason leaned in. "You don't tell me what's necessary. Lady, you think you're entitled to special treatment?" Behind a nearby bush, a young black man named Malik watched in disbelief. He had been out jogging, headphones in, when he noticed the scene unfolding. At first, he thought it might be a misunderstanding. But the moment he heard the officer raise his voice, he knew better. This was not about suspicion. This was about power. Quietly, Malik pulled out his phone and began recording. The phone camera captured every word, every movement. Evelyn's grace under pressure, Jason's growing aggression, the subtle shift from questioning to confrontation. As the minutes passed, the scene became increasingly difficult to watch. Jason grabbed Evelyn's wrist as she tried to stand, pulling her roughly to her feet. "You don't get to sit around here acting like you own the place," he growled. Evelyn tried to keep her balance, her cane clattering to the pavement. "Officer, please," she said, eyes meeting his, calm but firm. "You're hurting me. You people always play the victim." He snapped, then muttered something under his breath, something vile. Evelyn flinched. It wasn't the first time she'd heard such words, but it never stopped stinging. Malik's hands trembled around the phone, but he kept filming. Two passers-by slowed, watching the scene. One, a young white woman in a yoga outfit, paused, mouth slightly open in disbelief. She whispered to the man beside her, who simply shook his head and urged her to keep walking. No one intervened, but Malik did more than watch. He uploaded the video to Twitter with a simple caption, "This is America in 2025." Within minutes, the video began gaining traction. Jason, unaware that his actions were now visible to the world, shoved Evelyn back onto the bench. "Stay there. Don't move until I say you can. I will not be intimidated," she said, her voice strong and steady. "And I will not be silent." Jason leaned down, close enough that his breath hit her face. "You people should know your place." Malik turned off the camera and dialed 911, not to report Evelyn, but to report the cop. By the time Evelyn returned home that day, her knees ached, but her spirit remained unbroken. She refused to cry. She refused to tell her neighbors what had happened, though some had already seen the video and were buzzing with disbelief and outrage. Her phone rang constantly. Reporters, friends, strangers, but she stayed silent. Meanwhile, Malik's video reached 10,000 views by noon. By evening, it had crossed 1 million. #Justice for Evelyn began trending across platforms. Local news picked up the story. National outlets followed. Evelyn's face, stoic and proud in that wide-brimmed hat, was suddenly everywhere. The police department issued a short statement saying the incident was under review. Officer Jason Rourke was placed on temporary administrative leave, pending an investigation. Jason himself felt blindsided. "This is what I get for doing my job," he barked into the phone during a call with his union rep. She was resisting. "These people always cry wolf." His representative warned him to lay low. "This is different, Jason. That video, it's bad. Real bad." At home, Jason turned on the TV and saw his own face, blurred out, but unmistakably him, broadcast on national news. His wife refused to speak to him. His teenage son slammed the bedroom door when Jason tried to explain. But Jason didn't apologize. He felt angry, cornered, misunderstood. "They don't know who I am," he muttered to himself. "They don't know the full story." But the world had already made up its mind. Outside City Hall, the protests began quietly. Candles, flowers, posters with Evelyn's face and slogans like, "Respect our elders," and "Black Lives Matter." Still, a reporter finally caught Evelyn on the steps of her church, where she volunteered each Wednesday. Cameras swarmed as she adjusted her hat and faced the crowd. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she said, voice shaking slightly, "but I will not be silent when justice is denied." The reporters leaned in, scribbling every word. "I was not loitering. I was not dangerous. I was not doing anything wrong. I was simply existing while black. And for that, I was treated like a criminal." The clip went viral, adding fuel to the fire. Then came the bombshell. A city staffer leaked Evelyn's full name to a reporter. Evelyn Carter, mother of Marcus Carter, the mayor of Brookhaven. The news sent shockwaves through the city. Marcus Carter, young, charismatic, Harvard-educated, the city's first black mayor, was known for his commitment to equity and reform. But even he had not known what happened to his own mother. His press secretary released a statement. "Mayor Carter is aware of the incident involving his mother. He is heartbroken, furious, and committed to pursuing full accountability through every available channel." Inside his office, Marcus sat in stunned silence. He had always known that being black in America meant facing a different set of rules. But this was personal. And it was only the beginning. The following morning, Evelyn sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a mug of black tea gone cold. The early sunlight streamed through her window, dappling the faded linoleum floor with golden rectangles. Outside, the world was in motion. Cars passed. Children shouted. Dogs barked. But inside her home, time felt still. She had not slept much the night before. The storm of attention that followed her public statement had left her weary. She had spent decades keeping her head down, living with quiet grace and purpose, raising her son, teaching generations of children to read, to think, to be kind. Never in all her years had she wanted the spotlight. But now, she was standing at the center of a national firestorm. Her phone buzzed again, a voicemail. She didn't check it. Instead, she pulled out a photo album, thick with memories. There was Marcus at age 6, in his church choir robe, grinning with missing front teeth. Another of him in high school, accepting an award for public speaking. Then one from his mayoral inauguration, where he stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, beaming with pride. She had worn the same hat that day as she had in the park. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the kettle hissed again, Evelyn didn't notice the black SUV pulling up outside. It wasn't until she heard the doorbell that she rose slowly, placing the album back on the shelf. When she opened the door, Marcus stood there. "Hi, Mama," he said softly. She stared at him for a moment, then stepped aside. Inside, he sat across from her at the kitchen table, his suit still perfectly pressed, his mayoral pin glinting under the warm light. But his eyes, those brown eyes so like her own, were heavy. "I didn't know," he said finally. "They didn't tell me. I found out from the news." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "I know. I should have protected you. You're not responsible for what that man did, Marcus. But I am responsible for this city," he said, voice rising. "And it happened right here, in broad daylight, to my mother." There was a long silence between them. "I don't want revenge," Evelyn said quietly. "I want change, real change." Marcus nodded, jaw clenched. "Then we'll make that happen." And in that moment, the conversation stopped being personal and became something much bigger. Marcus Carter stood before a packed press conference at City Hall the next day. The room was swarming with cameras, reporters, activists, and residents. The mayor's face was somber, controlled, but underneath it was a storm of fury. "My name is Marcus Carter," he began, voice steady. "I am the elected mayor of this city. And I am also the son of Evelyn Carter, the woman you saw in the video." A murmur ran through the crowd. "I watched that video like many of you did. I saw an elderly black woman, minding her own business, treated with cruelty and disrespect by someone who had sworn to protect our citizens. I saw not just a failure of one officer, but a failure of a system that has for too long allowed behavior like this to continue unchecked." He paused, looking into the sea of flashing cameras. "My administration is launching an independent investigation into this incident, including the officer involved, the internal affairs handling of prior complaints, and the policies that enabled this abuse of power. We will be transparent, we will be thorough, and we will hold people accountable." The applause that followed was thunderous. But not everyone was pleased. Back at the precinct, Officer Jason Rourke watched the press conference on a TV mounted in the break room. He scoffed, chewing on a sandwich. "This is a goddamn witch hunt," he muttered. "I followed procedure." One of the younger officers sitting nearby shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Later that day, Jason received a formal letter placing him on unpaid suspension, pending investigation. His union lawyer called, advising him to remain silent, stay off social media, and let the process play out. But Jason couldn't keep quiet. He logged into his anonymous Reddit account and began posting rants about reverse racism, media manipulation, and how one bad video doesn't erase years of good service. He didn't realize that screenshots of those comments would be traced back to his IP address within 24 hours. The city wasn't just watching, it was remembering. The movement didn't take long to bloom. What had started as a single video clip had grown into a citywide reckoning. Protesters marched not only in front of police headquarters but throughout downtown. Black, white, brown, old and young, mothers pushing strollers beside Vietnam vets with protest signs. The chant echoed off buildings, "Justice for Evelyn. Justice for all." Community leaders held vigils in the evenings. At the heart of every gathering, a framed printout of the now iconic photo of Evelyn sitting calmly on the park bench. Hands folded, eyes looking just off camera. But the spotlight also brought the shadows. At night, counter-protesters appeared. Men with buzz cuts and American flags draped over their shoulders shouted obscenities. A scuffle broke out on the third night, and police moved in, not to de-escalate, but to arrest several of the peaceful protesters. It was caught on film. Again, Marcus was livid. He convened an emergency city council meeting and introduced a bold new policy, the formation of a civilian review board with investigative powers, subpoena rights, and an independent budget. It was unprecedented. The police union pushed back instantly. "This will gut morale," the union leader argued on television. "We cannot let political emotions dictate policing." But it was too late. The tide had turned. Within the week, anonymous tips began flowing to a newly created hotline, accounts of similar incidents. Older cases buried under paperwork, all pointing to a culture of intimidation and impunity within the department. One name appeared over and over again: Officer Jason Rourke. In a small apartment on the edge of the city, a woman named Tanya Jenkins watched the news in silence. Her fingers clutched the edges of the couch as the anchor announced. Officer Rourke has been linked to over a dozen excessive force complaints over the past decade. Tanya had tried to forget. She'd buried the memory deep. But now it came rushing back. 5 years ago, she had been stopped on her way home from work, just a routine traffic light issue. She thought Jason Rourke had pulled her over. And when she questioned the citation, he yanked open the door, dragged her out in front of her daughter, and slammed her against the hood. No body cam, no consequences. Until now. Tanya picked up her phone and dialed the hotline. "I have something to report," she said. Meanwhile, in his modest office, Marcus reviewed the growing stack of sworn statements pouring in, each one a thread in a tangled web of misconduct. He felt the gravity of it all pressing on his shoulders. Not just as mayor, not just as a son, but as a black man in a system rigged against his people. He picked up the phone and called his mother. "They're coming forward," he said, one by one. Evelyn sat quietly on the other end. "They always do, baby," she said. "When one voice dares to rise, it gives others the courage to speak." Outside her window, the birds sang as they always had. But for the first time in a long time, she believed the city might finally start listening. The newsroom at WBC Channel 8 was buzzing. A hive of half-shouted headlines and flickering screens. Reporter Kelly Monroe sat hunched at her desk, scrolling through case files and public records. She wasn't just chasing the story anymore, she was unraveling something deeper. Something rotten beneath the surface of the city's badge and blue. She'd been following the Evelyn Carter case since the beginning, captivated not just by the video but by the woman at its center. Evelyn's poise, her dignity, her restraint in the face of public humiliation, it haunted Kelly. And now, with the mayor personally promising reform, the city's eyes were glued to the unraveling truth. But Kelly knew a press conference and a protest weren't enough. The real story was buried in the silence, the complaints that went nowhere, the paper trails that disappeared. She had a name, Officer Jason Rourke, and she had a plan. In the archive room, deep in the station's basement, she unearthed an internal affairs report from 2018. A black teenager had accused Rourke of using excessive force during a routine stop. The boy suffered a broken wrist. The report had been inconclusive. No charges were filed, but that wasn't the only one. There were 5 more just like it, all with eerily similar language: resisting arrest, matched suspect description, failure to comply. Kelly leaned back in her chair, eyes wide with realization. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a pattern. Her editor was hesitant. "If you're going to run this, you need sources on the record." "I've already found one," she said. "Her name is Tanya Jenkins." Kelly contacted Tanya, who agreed to speak, but only if they met at her church. Away from cameras. That evening, sitting in the back pew of a dimly lit chapel, Tanya told her story. The memory was raw, still fresh, and her voice trembled with each word. But she didn't stop. "He slammed me down," Tanya whispered, "like I was trash, in front of my baby girl. I filed a complaint, never heard back." Kelly's recorder blinked red. This was it. The story wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about a culture that allowed Jason Rourke to wear a badge and carry a gun for more than a decade while leaving a trail of trauma behind him. And that story was about to break. Evelyn sat in her living room, a knitted shawl draped across her shoulders as she watched the evening news. Her teacup sat untouched on the table beside her. On the screen, Kelly Monroe's voice narrated a special report titled, "The Shielded Few." A decade of complaints against Officer Jason Rourke. The segment was damning. Victims appeared one by one, their identities shielded or partially blurred, but their stories vivid. A young man described being thrown against a wall for not showing ID fast enough. A nurse recalled being berated in front of her children during a traffic stop. Tanya's voice echoed last, raw and unfiltered. "I was scared to speak up before, but not now. If Evelyn Carter can stand tall, so can I." The footage cut to a montage of protests, of Evelyn speaking on the church steps, of Mayor Carter's impassioned press conference. The city, once divided in its reactions, was now tilting rapidly toward a collective realization. Something had to change. Marcus watched the report from his office, hand clenched around a pen. His aides shifted nervously around him, unsure whether to speak. When it ended, he stood up. "Tomorrow," he said, We draft the Evelyn Carter Accountability Act. It was ambitious. A package of legislation that would include mandatory body cameras, public access to officer disciplinary records, a ban on qualified immunity for repeat offenders, and the empowerment of a civilian review board with teeth, not just symbolism. The opposition was immediate. Police union leaders held a press conference decrying the act as an attack on law enforcement. Conservative talk radio hosts called Evelyn a tool for political ambition. Anonymous threats were left at City Hall. But Marcus didn't back down. He met with community leaders, sat with grieving families, listened to voices long ignored. And everywhere he went, people asked him the same thing: "How's your mama?" And every time, he smiled gently and said, "She's holding strong, just like this city." Jason Rourke sat in his apartment. Lights off, curtains drawn, the glow of the TV painting his face in shades of flickering blue. His world had shrunk to this dim, airless room filled with silence and static. Outside, protesters still gathered, chanting, holding signs, shouting his name like a curse. He didn't go outside anymore. His wife had left 2 weeks ago, taking their son with her. The union lawyer stopped returning his calls. The department had all but abandoned him. Pending further review, his badge had been turned in. His gun was gone. And now, so was the armor of silence he had always counted on. In a moment of desperation, Jason opened his laptop and wrote a letter. Not to the mayor, not to the media, to Evelyn Carter. He stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before typing. "Mrs. Carter, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve to be heard. But I need you to know I wasn't always like this. Somewhere along the way, I got angry. I got mean. I started seeing people as threats instead of neighbors. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was power. But whatever it was, it poisoned me. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for what I've done to others. I don't know if saying this helps anything. But I'm not hiding anymore." Jason Rourke. He didn't know if he would send it. But writing it felt like peeling away something rotted inside him. He hit print, folded the letter, and placed it in an envelope. It sat on his desk for hours, the weight of it almost unbearable. Evelyn was planting tulip bulbs in her small backyard when she heard the knock. She wiped her hands on her apron, dusted the soil from her sleeves, and opened the door to find a courier holding a plain white envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. She thanked him and shut the door, curiosity furrowing her brow. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened the letter, her hands slow, deliberate, as her eyes scanned the words. Her expression didn't change, no anger, no surprise, just a quiet, contemplative stillness, like a tree in the wind. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly and set it aside. She didn't know yet what she would do with it. Maybe she would write back. Maybe she wouldn't. But what she did know was this: she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Later that day, she walked through Rosewood Park again. The leaves were turning, gold and red, rustling gently under her feet. People watched her with reverence now. Some whispering her name, some nodding in respect. She passed the bench where it all began, paused, and sat down. A child ran past, laughing. A teenager jogged by with a fist in the air. Across the field, an elderly man saluted her with a wave. Evelyn closed her eyes, breathing in the air, the light. The memory of pain turned into purpose. This was her city, and it was starting to change. The courtroom was quieter than usual, despite the line of spectators waiting outside. The judge had ordered the gallery limited, citing order and decorum. But even in the silence, tension buzzed like static in the air. Evelyn Carter entered, escorted by a young aide from the mayor's office. She wore a dark navy dress with silver buttons and the same hat she had worn in the park that morning months ago. She moved slowly but upright, her cane clicking gently against the polished floor. The courtroom fell still at her presence. Jason Rourke sat at the defense table, hands folded, dressed in a plain navy suit that looked a size too big. He hadn't shaved that morning. His eyes, bloodshot and sunken, flickered toward Evelyn for only a second before falling again. He looked nothing like the man in that video. Gone was the swagger, the badge, the voice that once commanded power. What remained was a shell, a man no longer protected by silence. Judge Ramirez, an older Latina woman known for her restraint and fairness, entered. "We are here today to begin proceedings in the matter of the state versus Jason Rourke," she said, Charges include assault, abuse of power under color of law, racial intimidation, and falsification of police reports. The courtroom collectively inhaled. The prosecution opened with clarity and resolve. They played the viral video in silence, letting it speak for itself. The grainy footage filled the screens, Evelyn's calm, Jason's aggression. The courtroom watched it like they were watching history. Then came the testimony. First was Malik, the young man who had recorded the video. He spoke clearly, steadily. Despite the cameras and the weight of the moment, "I didn't expect it to explode like that," he said, "but I knew it was wrong. And I knew someone had to see it." Then came Tanya Jenkins, her voice quivering but resolute. She described her experience, how she had been yanked from her car, how her daughter had cried and screamed, how no one had ever followed up after she filed her complaint. The courtroom listened, stunned. Even Jason's lawyer remained silent for several seconds afterward. When Evelyn took the stand, the room felt almost reverent. She looked straight ahead. "I didn't want to be anyone's symbol. I just wanted to feed the birds and read my book in peace. But I know now that silence only protects those in power." Her voice never broke. Her gaze never faltered. Jason shifted in his seat but didn't raise his head. When she stepped down, the crowd exhaled. It was only the beginning of the trial. But already, something in the city had shifted. Outside the courthouse, the city pulsed with energy. The plaza was filled with supporters, residents holding signs that read "Justice for Evelyn." Accountability now. And this is our city too. Local musicians played softly. Street vendors offered water and granola bars. Strangers hugged. Mothers brought their children, pointing to the courthouse and whispering, "That's where it's happening." But not everyone was celebrating. Inside a drab office 3 blocks away, Chief of Police Alan Merritt sat stiffly at a long table, flanked by his legal counsel. He was preparing for his own appearance before the City Oversight Commission. For months, his department had been accused of burying complaints, misreporting internal investigations, and creating an environment of unchecked power. Marcus Carter, no longer just the mayor but the symbolic face of reform, entered the hearing with a thick binder of documents under his arm. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened. He looked more like a man going into battle than a politician. "Chief Merritt," Marcus began, "can you explain why Officer Rourke received no disciplinary action after multiple use of force complaints? Despite corroborating witness statements?" The chief hesitated. "We followed protocol. Not all complaints merit action." Marcus opened the binder and read from a report. On April 19, 2019, Officer Rourke was documented shoving a 15-year-old boy against a patrol car. The boy was hospitalized with a concussion. Your internal affairs unit declared the use of force appropriate. But body cam footage was never released to the public. Why not? Silence. Why not, Chief? More silence. The cameras caught every second. Outside, the live feed blared across phones and tablets. The public was watching, and they were no longer content with apologies. Jason sat in the holding cell, staring at his hands. They were calloused and rough. The knuckles scarred from years of training. Years of patrols. Years of arrests. They looked no different from any other man's hands. But lately, he wondered how many lives they had bruised. How many wrists they had twisted. How many lies they had written. His lawyer had advised him not to testify. But he had made up his mind. When he took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. He looked smaller than he had ever seemed. There was no badge, no uniform, no shield. He looked at the jury. Then briefly at Evelyn. "I was wrong," he began, his voice hoarse. "I was trained to believe in order, in respect, in control. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking control meant domination. I thought fear was respect. And when I saw people like Mrs. Carter, people who didn't flinch, who didn't cower, I saw defiance. And I reacted, not like a protector, like a tyrant." He paused, swallowed hard. "I didn't just fail as a cop. I failed as a man." He folded the letter he had written Evelyn into a small square and held it in his hand like a lifeline. "I don't expect redemption, but I'm ready to face what comes." His lawyer said nothing. The judge said nothing. But in the gallery, someone began to cry softly. Evelyn looked at him, long and measured. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. But she didn't look away. The jury took less than 2 days. Jason Rourke was found guilty on all counts. The sentencing was scheduled for the following week. But for many, The verdict itself was the real victory. Outside the courthouse, the plaza erupted, not in rage, but in song. Church choirs and marching bands, jazz horns and freedom chants echoed across the city square. It was a celebration not of punishment, but of reckoning, of possibility, of breath. Evelyn returned to Rosewood Park that afternoon. This time, she wasn't alone. Marcus walked beside her, holding her arm gently. Children ran past them, laughing. A group of college students waved from a picnic blanket. The bench where it had all started had been replaced with a new one, polished wood. Brass plaque, and all. The plaque read, "To Evelyn Carter, for the courage to sit still when others demanded you stand down." She sat slowly, taking in the view. The sun filtered through the trees. The birds chirped in the branches above. A soft breeze lifted the edge of her scarf. She turned to her son. "This city's not perfect," she said. "No, it's not," Marcus replied, "but it's better than it was." She smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. Then she reached into her tote and pulled out her book. The same one, And Still I Rise. She opened it, turned a page, and began to read. And around her, the world kept moving, not past her, not above her, but with her. Finally, the sentencing hearing took place in the same courtroom where the city had first witnessed Jason Rourke without his badge. This time, the air was less tense but not without weight. There was no mystery left about the facts. What remained now was judgment. Judge Ramirez sat behind the bench, her eyes tired but composed. Jason Rourke stood before her in a gray suit, hands loosely folded, his posture oddly still. Evelyn Carter was seated quietly in the front row. She had chosen to come alone, declining her son's offer to accompany her. "This part," she had said, "is for me." Before the sentence was announced, the judge asked if there was anything the defendant wished to say. Jason rose, turned toward Evelyn, and spoke without a paper in his hand. "I never expected your forgiveness," he said, "but I do hope that one day, when your story is told, it won't be overshadowed by men like me. You were always more than a victim. You were a mirror, and I didn't like what I saw." Evelyn did not blink. She simply looked back at him with the same unwavering gaze that had ignited a movement. The judge sentenced Jason to 4 years in state prison for the charges of assault, abuse of power, and civil rights violations, along with permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. He would no longer be able to serve in any position of public authority. There were no cheers in the courtroom, no clapping, just a collective exhale, like the release of a breath that had been held for too long. As the bailiff led Jason away, he didn't look back, and Evelyn remained seated, her hands resting gently in her lap. Outside, the city was calm, not in a way that meant silence or ignorance, but the kind of calm that follows a storm. When the air feels clean, and the soil feels ready to grow something new. The city council voted unanimously to pass the Evelyn Carter Accountability Act. In a chamber usually defined by political posturing and closed-door deals. The vote was swift, public, and transparent. The new law would overhaul internal affairs procedures, require full public reporting of officer misconduct, fund body camera programs across all precincts, and create a standing civilian oversight committee with enforcement power. Marcus Carter stood with the pen in his hand before signing the legislation into law. Behind him stood faith leaders, activists, victims of abuse, community organizers, and Evelyn herself. When he turned and offered her the pen, she held it delicately between her fingers, as if she were holding a seed. "I never wanted my name on a law," she whispered, "but I'm proud if it means fewer mothers will have to cry, fewer sons will have to kneel, and fewer elders will be told they don't belong." That night, the city held a candlelight vigil in Rosewood Park. People brought their children, musicians played hymns, the mayor read aloud from the preamble of the new law, and then, stepping aside, invited Evelyn to speak. She did not take the podium. She stood beside the new bench, her bench, and said simply, "Let us remember that laws are only the beginning. We must live them, teach them, defend them, in every classroom, every station, every street." The crowd lit their candles and held them high. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn cried, not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of shared light. In the quiet hours of morning, deep inside a correctional facility outside the city, Jason Rourke began his day like any other inmate. Wake at 5 a.m., head count at 6. The clatter of steel doors. The stale air of confinement. But unlike others, he kept to himself. He read, wrote, and worked in the prison library sorting books. There was no sense of martyrdom in him, nor self-pity, only silence. One day, a fellow inmate, an older black man named Lewis, sat beside him during breakfast. "You're the cop, right?" Jason hesitated, then nodded. "You're the one who messed with that old lady." Jason said nothing. Lewis took a long sip from his carton of milk. "You know," he said, "I watched that trial on the TV. We all did. You looked like a man being stripped naked. Slow and painful." Jason looked down at his tray. Lewis leaned in. "You ever write her back?" Jason blinked. He had never sent the first letter. He had written another. Dozens. Actually. All tucked into a composition notebook in his cell drawer. All unsent. That night, under the flickering fluorescent light, Jason took out the notebook. He tore out one page, carefully folded it, and wrote on the front, E. Carter. A week later, Evelyn received it in her mail. There was no return address. No signature. Just a letter written in uneven script. "I have been thinking a lot about justice. For most of my life. I thought it meant obedience, silence, and order. But I think I understand now that justice doesn't need silence. It needs truth. I won't ask anything from you, because I've already taken too much. But I wanted to say thank you for making me look at myself. Maybe for the first time ever. Not as a cop, not as a man, just as a soul." Evelyn read it in her garden. She folded it slowly, slid it into her coat pocket, and went back to planting. Sometimes, change did not come with marching bands or flashing lights. Sometimes, it came with the slow, unseen turning of a heart. The year passed quietly, but the city was not the same. Rosewood Park was now a national landmark, known not just for its beauty, but for the story it told. The new community center next to it bore the name, the Evelyn Carter House of Justice. Offering free legal services, youth programs, and educational workshops, tourists came, but more importantly, locals returned. Evelyn, now 75, continued her daily walks to the park. Her steps were slower, her hands a little more fragile, but her spirit had only grown stronger. She still fed the birds, still read her favorite books, still sat at the bench engraved with her name. One spring morning, as the sun crept gently through the budding trees, Evelyn did not rise from her bench. A groundskeeper found her shortly after sunrise. She was sitting peacefully, hands folded, a book resting on her lap. The pages fluttered in the wind. The city mourned. The mayor declared a week of remembrance. Schools held assemblies. Churches lit candles. Her funeral drew thousands. And across the nation, news outlets ran her story, not as a tragedy, but as a triumph. A woman who had sat still and shook the foundations of a city. At her memorial, Marcus stood beneath the marble columns of City Hall and spoke with tears in his eyes. "My mother didn't change the world by marching or shouting. She changed it by being still in her truth. She didn't fight for revenge. She stood for justice. And now it is our job to continue what she started." Later that evening, a small child, no older than 5, wandered through Rosewood Park with her grandmother. She pointed at the statue near the bench. Newly erected, bronze and beautiful. "Who is she?" the child asked. The grandmother smiled. "That's Miss Evelyn," she said. "She's the reason we all walk free with our heads high." The child looked up at the statue's calm eyes and open hands. "She looks like someone who loved a lot of people." "She did," said the grandmother, "even those who didn't love her back." The sun dipped below the horizon. The birds soared overhead. And Evelyn Carter, though gone in body, remained in the roots of her city, in the soil, in the law, in the light.